Welcome to the Discriminating Gamer, the board game review show that was based on Milton Berle's character from It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. He just went sailing out there! Ladies and gentlemen, do you like Risk? Do you like Game of Thrones? Two great tastes that taste great together. Today we're going to take a look at Game of Thrones Risk from USAopoly.
As they say, winter is approaching.
That is what we say, right? Is that the thing we say? I don't know, I've killed them all.
In Game of Thrones Risk, or Risk Game of Thrones from USAopoly, players are actually given the choice of playing two different games. Now, there's a standard skirmish game, which is very similar to kind of the standard game of Risk, and then there is the domination game, which is a lot more complex. You're bringing in characters and all sorts of fun and interesting and thematic things into the game. Now, for this review today, we're just looking at the skirmish game. We're just looking at the skirmish game for a couple of reasons. Now, first of all, the domination game takes about 6 to 7 players to play, and it's kind of hard to round up that many people sometimes. Now, the second reason is the good people at USAopoly sent me this review copy to look at, and when I received it, I actually got 2 of the figure tubs for the Starks, the gray Starks, and I didn't get the green Tyrells, so, of course, that was kind of disappointing. I went ahead, I contacted them. They're going to send me out the appropriate figures here shortly. So, good customer service from USAopoly. I was very pleased about that. The skirmish game in Game of Thrones Risk is, as I say, very similar to a standard game of Risk, with, of course, a few notable exceptions. Now, essentially, you're playing on a game board of Westeros. Now, the game actually comes with Westeros and Essos. And in the 2-player skirmish game, you're going to probably play it on the Essos board. If you got, 3 to 5 players, you're probably going to want to play on the skirmish game on the Westeros board. If you're playing with 6 to 7 players, you're actually going to combine the Westeros and the Essos boards to kind of have an uber game, right? But the 3 to 5 skirmish player game essentially is very similar to Risk. At the beginning of the game, you're going to pass out a number of territory cards. Each player is going to get roughly an equal number of territory cards. And they're spread out all over the boards because it's all random. And then with those, you place 2 armies in every section of the board. The units themselves are pretty cool. You have the little ones, which are 1s, and the bigger ones, which are 3, and they're, of course, quite thematic. You have lions for Lannisters, wolves for the Starks, you have dragons for the Targaryens, so there's a very thematic feel even in the skirmish game with just the units. So you're placing these 2 units in all the spots around the board until the board is completely filled up with armies. What you're then going to do is take all of those territory cards, mix them back up, and then somewhere in the bottom half, you're going to mix in a Valor Morghulis card, which essentially is end-of-game card. So somewhere in the bottom half of the deck, you've got an end-of-game card. As soon as you would draw that card, the game is over. Now, there's essentially 4 phases here. The first phase is the reinforcement phase. During this phase, you are placing armies. Essentially, you're adding up all the territories you have. If you get bonuses for controlling, all of one color territory, you get those bonuses as well. You also add in castles that you have. And then if you have any of the territory cards, you can go ahead and trade those in by consulting a chart which tells you what you can get when you have kind of ones that match, or if you have 3 different kinds of cards to hand in. Your hand size can only ever be 5 cards, so you're going to be getting these kind of bonus cards, fairly regularly. Second is the invade phase, and the invade phase, of course, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the game. Essentially, what you're going to do is declare your attacks around the board. You can only ever attack with a maximum of 3. Now, you can kind of keep coming in, because you can kind of keep coming into these things if you have more armies to do so, but you can only attack with 3 at a time. The defender can only attack with a maximum of 2 at a time. So the defender's going to have 3 dice. If he comes in full strength, the defender will have 2 dice if he's got full strength. And then, of course, you do that old classic Risk thing where you compare highest roll to highest roll, second highest roll to second highest roll, and that's the way you determine the winners or the losers of combat. So you want to go ahead and attack castles, because they're going to add to your reinforcement number, or try to conquer more of kind of regions, and that will add to your reinforcement number. So you really want to stay on the ball with those things. Now, the map of Westeros also has ports. It has 2 different colors of ports. One color on one coastline, another color on the other coastline. And that essentially is because you can attack from one port on one coastline to any other port on that coastline, or on the other side, but you can't attack from one side to the other. You can't go from one port to the other. You have to stay on that same coastal area.
As they say, winter will soon be here. I feel like I'm still saying that wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's too much wine.
Now, third, you can do a maneuver. Essentially, you can reinforce any number of armies from one area to another area, but you always, of course, have to leave one army behind to control the area you came from.
How dare you even think... Wait, what? Oh, you were saying insects. I'm sorry. Mistake.
Now, finally, if you have conquered at least one territory that turn, you can draw a territory card. Now, territory cards, they're the kind of things that are going to allow you to get those bonuses that you're going to trade in during the reinforcement phase. The reinforcement phase, again, is where you add up all of your castles and your territories, and you divide it by 3, and that gives you the number of armies you're going to get. Then you can play the bonus cards to get more armies.
My favorite part of Game of Thrones? The fairies. Not many fairies?
So you go around and around like this. If ever any player's armies are completely eliminated from the board, he is eliminated from the game. But essentially, you're going to keep going until, as I say, that Valor Morghulis card is revealed, and then it's drawn. That ends the game. Then you're going to add up points. You determine points by who has the most territories, who has the most castles, and who has the most ports. You add all those things together. Whoever scores the highest wins. Game of Thrones Risk.
And the most disturbing part is, I'm a man.
So what do I think of the skirmish game of Game of Thrones Risk? Well, let me tell you, first of all, the production value, I think, is very good, generally speaking. The boards, both the Westeros and the Essos boards, look absolutely fantastic. They are beautiful. The box itself, the inlay, it's got this kind of dark map. It's got an insert that really holds things together well. I generally am very pleased. The card quality is a little lighter than I would have liked. I would have liked a little nicer card quality as far as the stock of it goes, but it's got, in the Domination game, you got pictures from the series and the characters, so just on the whole, very impressed with the production here. And of course, as far as gameplay goes for the skirmish game, it's Risk. You're essentially playing a game of Risk. There may be a few little tweaks here and there, but essentially you're playing a game of Risk, and I like Risk. I haven't played Risk literally in years. But I always liked it when I was younger, and of course I like Game of Thrones, and so I like this combination. It works well. The mechanics of Risk really lend themselves well to the Game of Thrones universe, where you are constantly at war, you're constantly making truces, and you're kind of negotiating here, and that works very, very well. Now, some people may be tempted to kind of compare this game to Game of Thrones, the board game, from Fantasy Flight Games. And they're very different games. They're very different. This is essentially just a straight war game Risk, whereas the negotiation and the betrayal aspect of the Game of Thrones books and TV show are a little bit heightened in the Fantasy Flight game, and it's a much different game. It's much more about negotiation, whereas I would say this Risk game is much more about war. They're both great games. They're both a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Game of Thrones Risk. I think it's a whole lot of fun. I'm looking forward to getting people together to play the Domination game, because that, frankly, looks amazing. And hopefully somewhere down the line I'll be able to tell you more about that one. But it looks great. So the recommendation for the discriminating gamer for Game of Thrones Risk is buy it. Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. We are The Discriminating Gamer, and a discriminating gamer always pays its debts.
Please somebody help me on my feet again. And I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
Listen, do you like your kids? Are you happy with them? You think they've turned out okay?
I feel like 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
I know, Tommen.
Yeah, he's the worst. Smart, kind, level-headed. Whose womb did he come out of?
I know. Well, anyway.
And in a lot of my dreams, I see piles of bodies. I see fire, and I see ice. And then somebody in the middle of that spotlight singing a song,
It's a song
about
of
the
ice and
fire,
fire,
and
yeah.
and the ice.